Well, hey there, guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 13 of our Toys and Joys dump truck and pup trailer build. Well, this is quite possibly one of the longest model series I have ever done here on the channel, and we're still pushing forward with it. So we're going to continue on today, still working on that cab and the engine compartment assembly. So let's head over to the bench and see what we've got in store. Well, truth be told, I'm still waiting for this one fender assembly to dry on the body of the truck. I don't want to rush it. I don't want to push it. I know I said we were going to even out this surface here, and we will get to that. But for now, I don't want to waste the time while I'm waiting for this to dry. So I'm going to use one of my sanding blocks, and we're just going to gently blend this joint together, the joint between the cab and this 8.5-degree angle of the engine body. As well, right here, right at the top of this A pillar for our cab, we have this sharp point. We want to take our sanding block and we're going to sand this and blend it into the roundover that's here on our hood. So we can get this side shaped, glue on the other fender, and then do the exact same thing. Shape it up and blend it together. And when we get that done, then we're going to attack this interior curve of our fender. Well, at this point, I really need to address something that's been eating at me with this model, and I just haven't quite been able to put my finger on it yet. And what it is my frame is sloping down. The rear frame by the dually wheels is about 1/2 inch lower than the front of the frame. And because of that, the drop down wheels are always dropped down. Like, you can put them up as high as you want and they still touch the ground. And I thought that's kind of strange. But I'll address that at some point in time. And I've kind of been thinking about it and trying to piece it together and trying to think of what it is that could have changed or could be different, or what kind of a mistake I could have made. And what we have is, if we want to look at the prints and we look at page 2, sheet 2 of 9, and we can see here that the rear springs, making 2 of them, they are 1.25 inches long. And that is the piece that joins onto our frame spacer right here to allow our axle to go in through and to pivot. And I had mentioned when I first installed this that it doesn't really pivot much. And I thought that to be a little strange, but I thought no big deal. I'll figure that out after. Well, if we look back at our drawings at sheet 9 of 9, we can see this piece here, which is our rear spring. That same piece that was supposed to be 1.25 inches long. But if we measure that piece here on the 1-to-1 drawing, it is actually 1 5/8, which makes it almost 1/2 inch in difference. And that would be why my rear axles are sloping, or the frame rather is sloping. So I'm not happy about that. So what I'm going to have to do now is I'm actually going to have to cut that apart. It might be a little finicky to get it out of there. We'll see. I'm going to try to snap out this pin that holds it in place, get that I think it's a 3/16 dowel. I'm going to try to get that out of there and pull that axle assembly completely out. And then from there, maybe I can cut out those brackets, remake them at the proper angle, and or at the proper length rather, and see how it is. But I don't know if you can see that. You see how it slopes down like that? We've got on this side here about 1 5/8 to the base of the frame. So let me get that changed up and cut apart, and I'll see if I can fix it, and then we'll carry on. Okay, well, I got the assembly out. I snapped off the front axle assembly by accident, and I've got a little bit of damage here and there. No big deal. We're going to work around it. We can use a chisel to clean up any of our pieces here that were left behind. This was from the end caps of that 3/16 dowel. These little small pieces are now junk. We can clean up with a chisel in here to give us a fresh wood surface for the glue to attach to once we get the new pieces made, and we'll put it back together. But guys, this is a very classic example. If you remember, I said earlier in the build, do not glue your wheels in. And this is just a prime example as to why you don't do that. Because here it was, we had an unforeseen circumstance that we had to bust this apart. Had this been another situation where the wheels were glued in, chances are I'd have to bust all my axle pegs out and remove the rear wheels, etc. As it was, I was just able to pull them off and get better access to this entire assembly. So let me get this fixed up, and then we can carry on. Because actually, it's probably a good thing that this happened, because I noticed a piece that I forgot to make for this rear spring assembly. Well, I've already pretty much got this one shaped. Guys, this is not a technical process. I'm just using a sanding drum on my cordless drill, believe it or not. And we're just going to start it up. This is actually in reverse. You want it to spin kind of towards the inside of the truck. Don't spin it this way, because if it hooks this extension piece, it could snap it. So we'll just carefully start the drill up and trim it down until it's flush. And there we go. And while it may be a little bit barbaric, or some of you may think it may be a little aggressive, it's fine. The pieces in this case are sturdy enough and strong enough that they can take that kind of sanding. And you get a really nice profile there on the inside that matches up with our fenders. So we can now do a dry fit on our model. And there we go. That is now repaired, but this is much better now. The frame is now level. The drop down axle works properly, whereas it didn't before. And what I'm going to need to do now is get our walnut caps here on this 3/16 of an inch dowel. I was a little concerned with the drive shaft and whether or not this would change the geometry and make the drive shaft fall out. But it really hasn't changed it too much, and the drive shaft still holds in place. So sorry about that, guys. I wish I would have caught that sooner, and I did look for it several times and couldn't find the problem. And then finally it bugged me enough that I went through before I carried on. But the parts that we missed here now, so this is the bonus of making this little error, is that we missed to make the spring top and the spring top spacer. Those are very, very thin parts. 1/8 of an inch thick for the spring top spacer, 1/4 for the spring top. And all we're going to do, guys, is cut these out using our small parts cutting jig and the scroll saw, and we will glue them in place on top of our springs before we glue that whole assembly in. So I'm actually glad this happened, because I was able to catch those pieces. So let's get them made and glued on top here. All right, so we've got those pieces for the rear springs glued in place, and I now want to make the lower cab trim that goes right along here, but I'm a little confused because in this view and in this view and even in this little view, it all shows these little cab lights. But yet when we look at the pattern for the lower cab trim, they're nowhere to be found. So I'm going to kind of fabricate it and see how we like it. I'm going to make one of each. I don't know if I want those little lights or not. So we're going to try it and see what happens. So the very first thing that I've done is I've cut the stock to its dimensions, which is 5/16 of an inch wide, 3 inches long. And this is this is 3/32 of an inch, or 3/16. I need it 3/32. Okay, so that's my mistake. But I've also cut the end here at a 15-degree angle. I thought that looked a little odd, but that's okay. I can cut that down maybe. So I'm going to redo this and make these pieces in 3/32 inch stock. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to scale off of the drawing, because in the main drawing, which shows the actual profile of this truck, we can scale off this and get our dimensions. And I'm going to drill 1/8 inch diameter holes at each one of those spots in our pieces. All right, so I've cut them to the proper thickness now. I had to recut them. There was no way to cut those other ones down. But what I've done is in these first two, I have drilled those 1/8 diameter holes. And I already have one glued up. Just going to put this here. I'm just putting some glue in these holes. And then, like, this is finicky stuff here. But I have some 1/8 inch diameter dowels. I have cut them just little slivers, just like that. And we're going to hammer them into the holes and let them dry up. And once we get them dried up, we're going to, using our MDF and sandpaper, we're going to sand both flat edges here to get those dowels to be flush. And then we'll have a look at it and see how we like it and whether or not we want to incorporate these lights into our model build. All right, so I have my 4 trim pieces, and what I have here, I have that 1/16 of an inch diameter straight router bit here in the router table. I know that on the plans it calls for a V groove, but I don't have that bit, so the 1/16 will do just fine. And what you want to do is 1 inch from your flat end, not from your beveled end, you want to place a routing. And all we're using is our miter fence from our table saw. So you can set your stop up just like you would with any other setup. Here we go. And we'll just run this through and I'll show you what you get. So at this point, I just need to decide, do I want this to be plain, which will be this piece right here, goes on just like that, or do I want it, let's try it with the lights. You know, I kind of like the lights. All right, so that's what I'll go with. I'll go with the lights, and all I'm going to do is glue these in place. We're going to glue them in so that they are flush with the bottom of the cab, and you kind of want that routing to match up with the routing that you did right here. So let's get those glued in place and we can carry on. All right, and there's the trim on both the passenger and the driver's side. It all looks great. I like those lights. I kind of glad I went that route, but you can do whichever one you prefer. Who knows, maybe your plans actually have them listed. So I have the frame turned upside down here, and I want to glue in the hitch that we made earlier. And here's another argument for not gluing the wheels in place yet, and that is we really need the room here to be able to get a square in to make sure that it's well aligned and it looks good. So we're going to glue this in place, as well as the hitch mounting bracket that we also made earlier in the show. So we'll get that glued in, get it squared up, and then we're going to glue in our taillight frame as well. Okay, and the rear tail light assembly and the mud flaps, they actually get glued on. At first, when I looked at it, I thought they got glued flush up here to the top of the frame, but that's not true. It's actually 1/2 inch down from the top. So we're going to use a 1/2 inch spacer block or setup block in order to be able to duplicate that 1/2 inch dimension perfectly. We'll just apply a little bit of glue there, and we're going to glue this in place. All right, well, we're looking good here. But when I was going through my little bin to get out my mud flap assembly and that sort of thing. Hey, look what I found. I found two spring tops and our spring top spacers that we made much earlier in the build. I just forgotten that we made them. But something else that I also found were these, and these are the rear spring brackets that we were supposed to make too. They're from sheet 2 of 9. We can see them here. Guys, I have searched every page on this plan over and over and over. At the moment, I honestly have no idea where these go. Not a clue. I can't find them on the plans. I can't find them listed. I can't find any positions where they would get glued into place. So for now, I'm just going to put them back into my little parts box here of pieces that we've made along the way. And hopefully at some point in time, I'm going to find them on the build in the drawing as I go through, and it won't be too late to add them. But for now, the rear spring brackets, I haven't got the foggiest notion where those things go. Well, it's been a long morning of milling stock and cutting pieces to their dimensions. So if we're looking here at sheet 6 of 9, I have cut the pieces I need for the dump box front trim. I've cut the 2 dump box sides, the dump box bottom, the dump box front. I have also cut the dump box top trim and the dump box lower trim. And as well, I have cut some strips that are going to be for the dump box inner trims. Guys, these are more suited to cut as needed. I'm probably going to rough cut these at their 45-degree and they're flat, but cut them a little longer than what we need them. That way they can be custom fit at each length. So because the dump box sides are only 1/8 of an inch thick, we're going to actually assemble all the trim on this first. I want to give this some rigidity. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sand the face, and then we're going to take our dump box front trims and we're going to glue it in place here on our model. But we need to have it so that it is flush with the bottom and it will protrude over one edge, just like this, by 1/8 of an inch. And that will allow the dump box front panel to be installed. So this is our first step, is to get this piece here glued on to both of our side pieces. Okay, and while we're waiting for those pieces to dry up, by the way, guys, make sure that you're making a left and a right. Don't just glue them both on the exact same way. They have to be opposites in order to work. But while we're waiting for those to dry, because I want them completely dry before I carry on, I have taken our dump box front panel and I have marked out this center hole that we can see here on sheet 6. And I'm just going to cut this at the scroll saw, guys. Nothing fancy here. All right, and you should have something that looks like this. And this piece now is pretty much done. We can just put it aside for now. The glue on our side panels and those dump box front trims should be dry now. And we've got a nice 1/8 overhang here, courtesy of our setup blocks. And I've also, before it dried, you'll want to make sure that this is perfectly square to the frame. So what we need to do now, the way that this sits is like this. This protruding top part is the top. So our trim piece, our lower dump box trim, we're going to align these pieces tight up against our front trims, and with our 45 facing up, it should line up flush with the back, and it does, as long as you took careful measurements. And we're going to glue these in place and let them fully dry up as well on both of our side panels. And at this point, we can glue on our dump box top trim. And that will just get glued on here like this, right up at the top, level and flush with the top of our dump box side. So let's get this glued in place, and again, let it completely dry. Well, the next pieces I want to glue on to our dump box sides are the dump box inner trims. I've cut them a little bit longer. We're going to do individual cuts on these just to trim them up to size. But these are the pieces here. And this is how they're going to go between our top trim piece and our sloped lower trim piece. The important part here, guys, is to get them square here against the top frame. But where do they go? Well, you're going to have to do a little bit of searching, because there's actually only one place on the entire print where it shows these things in their one-to-one measured location. And that's way back here on our cover page. So you'll have to scale off this drawing to get their locations. They're all equally spaced, and truth be told, I've already scaled it off. And from the edge of our front trim to the edge of the first one, this is 1 7/16. And then there's 1 7/16 gap in between each one of our pieces all the way across. So all we need to do now is place a spacer block here between this piece and this piece, a total of 1 7/16 of an inch across, and we can just line them up and glue them in one by one, letting each one dry so that they're not shifting as we place them on the sides of the dump truck. And as long as you take your time, you end up with two pieces that look like this. So these are the sides of our dump truck done pretty much. We have a couple more things to add. But other than that, again, we can see here on the plans on sheet 6 of 9, guys, they have these lights here again in the assembly drawing, but nothing on the pattern. They should have gone right up along here. So do I add them now? I don't know. I might, I may not. But if I do, it'll be the exact same method that we added the ones right over here on the door trim. Okay, well, I decided I was going to add those lights. And I've just, the same method that we used to drill them in here into our door trim, I've done that on this upright front piece. Now, guys, you can just scale off the original cover drawing to get the positioning of these 1/8 inch diameter dowels. So once you get those done and sanded, there's one last piece I want to do for today's show, and that will be the dump bottom. There is one little cutout here. We can see it here on the drawing. Guys, just follow the dimensions on the prints. I've measured it in and drawn it out onto our actual stock, and I'm just going to cut this very carefully over at the scroll saw. It is not an imperative dimension. There's other parts that get built around this. So even if it's a little tiny bit crooked, you will never see it because of the interior pieces that get built from this point forward. And unfortunately, once again, guys, we are out of time on this week's show. It's amazing how fast this goes by. We have really made some serious progress at this point. That dump box is really coming together. We've just got the pieces right now, but in next week's show, we're going to go a little further into that dump box and really start pulling it all together. Guys, if at any point in time, if you're following along with this build, if you have any kind of issues or you're having problems or you have some questions that you're not quite sure about, guys, send me an email. You can email me at kennye@acutabovewoodworkings.com, and I would be more than happy to help you out if I can. Some questions, obviously, I can't answer, but any question you might have, I'd be more than happy to throw my 2 cents into the ring and hopefully be able to help you out. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We have an amazing audience base here on the show, guys, and I really hope that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's content. I hope you found this informative, and if not informative, at least a little bit interesting and entertaining. I hope that you're following along at home. But more importantly, guys, I hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.